Okay, good morning. That's our cue. And thanks for joining. I can see the participants ramping up as we go ahead. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Rick Walsworth, the Director of Product Marketing here at in the VMware Cloud Foundation division of Broadcom. I'm joined by Pete Fletcher and David Linthicum. I'll let them introduce themselves in just a minute. But before we do start, did want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Any questions throughout this webinar, we'll answer those in real time. There's the Q&A feature of the Zoom interface that you can certainly use to be able to do that. This is being recorded, so we will essentially rebroadcast this over a number of our channels as part of that. And there's also a survey at the end. We do appreciate your feedback as part of the survey as we do this. So just to get started, wanted to do quick introductions. David, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. David Linthicum. I have my own firm, Linthicum Research. Prior to this, I was a chief cloud strategy officer at Deloitte for many, many years. I've been in the business for about 40 years. Started off as an AI analyst, programming Prolog in the 40-year career, written 17 books, had 2 CEO positions and 5 CTO positions.
Excellent. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining. And Pete Fletcher. Pete, introduce yourself.
Hey, Pete Fletcher, VCF Product Marketing, host of the Virtually Speaking podcast, and also president of the New York Knicks fan club. So nice to be here.
Go Knicks.
Timely. There you go. There you go. So great. And this is going to be a great discussion. You know, this is not the format of your typical webcast. This is going to be much more conversational. And our goal here is to really try to educate and be able to make sure that we're, providing a data-driven case for private cloud. And there's a lot behind this, and certainly we're going to pack a lot of material into this webcast. And again, we do want to make sure that if you have questions, use the Q&A feature of the Zoom interface to ask your questions. We'll go through and essentially provide a bit of a roadmap talking about some of the myth busters that are out there relative to private cloud in terms of what it is and what it isn't. We will touch on the most recent private cloud outlook report. This is actually a report that's published annually. The second annual edition just published last week, so I think it's great timing. And it's really around the AI tipping point. And we're going to talk specifically about some of the drivers there, as well as some of the drivers that are bringing private cloud into adoption and into the forefront. I mean, just short, 3 or 4 years ago, private cloud was really not even considered in a lot of these use cases and a lot of these deployments. And certainly we have seen a big uptick in this and wanted to be able to share some of those insights with you as part of this webinar. And then finally, we'll close around choosing the right private AI platform, because there's absolutely an intersection what's happening between AI and AI infrastructure deployments and private cloud. And we want to be able to pull these together as part of that. We'll close at the end and then answer some of the questions that you ask within the Q&A panel, and we'll answer those questions live. So, this first starting here, and Dave, I think this is really around how you were positioning private cloud out there and really positioning it relative to some of the challenges that people see within the private cloud space, and certainly comparing it to public cloud, right? And there's a lot of points that you raised within this post that I thought might be good to be able to bring back, because help us set up a little bit in terms of what private cloud is and how do we overcome some of the myths about private cloud.
Yeah, there's a lot of misunderstandings that I see around private cloud relative to the industry right now. And I think that's because it's been around for a long time and people are looking at private cloud 10 years ago and kind of considering that to be private cloud today, which it is not. So private cloud, number one, is almost always going to be less expensive than the public cloud alternatives. And the reason why, we own equipment that has gone down a lot in price over the last 10 years. I wrote about that in my Insiders book. You're paying about 3 times what you thought you would be paying for the public cloud providers. Private clouds allow you to use your own equipment and use your own equipment in an optimized way. And so with the benefit of that comes we're able to set it up also with easy to drive installation programs. In other words, when I did private cloud installations 10, 15 years ago, it was an engineering project, and it's not anymore. It takes very little time to set it up, get it up and running. For example, the technology that you guys sell. And it's almost as easy as setting up a public cloud provider. You own the equipment and you control it. Also, the governance and compliance issues that are coming up fast and furious. Everybody is looking for sovereign-based AI, sovereign-based data that has to run in the country of origin, and the ability to have complete control over that. Obviously, that doesn't mix well with remote public cloud providers where your data is going to be all over the place once it's in the network. And also the ability to kind of get to the performance we need out of these systems. Public cloud is a latency issue. In other words, round trip packets that flow, out to the big public cloud providers and back into the enterprise are going to slow things down. And if you're running the thing on your own enterprise network and it's controlled and locked into that network, then it's going to be incredibly fast. So there's lots of benefits of private cloud that people have a tendency not to consider. They're looking at, private cloud the way it was 10 years ago. It's a completely different animal right now. It's going to be way more cost effective, and it's going to be one of the chief architectural solutions you consider. I don't consider it, private cloud only kind of an enterprise. When I'm saying private cloud, when it makes sense, you're going to find it's going to be making sense way more than you think it's going to be, than you thought it was going to be in the past.
I agree. And one of the things I liked about that article is it talked a lot about the fact that there was private cloud, and then public cloud introduced this expectation of actually having as a service, and being this expectation. And when you think of the new modern private cloud, it's not just going back to private cloud. It's actually those expectations of as a service still exist on the current private cloud. It's not like we're just, having just and now we're just on premises now. Like there's a different, like a modern private cloud has everything. It has all of your compute, your storage, your networking, your operations, but it also has that as a service ability for your consumers.
Yeah, what I tell my clients, if you install this thing and size it correctly, it's going to be indistinguishable from a public cloud provider. In other words, the ability to allocate the resources you need, the ability to provision and deprovision, the ability to monitor use of storage, use of compute systems, the ability to get access to these very expensive, cores that we're going to be there on the public cloud providers you're able to do in the private cloud. So it provides the same flexibility. People don't get that. They think the flexibility is not going to be there. If I have to install something, I have to go down to the data center and install a server into the wall and get it up and running. No, none of that's there. It basically functions like a public cloud provider, but you own the environment, you own the complete systems.
Yeah, and that's the key point, right? Is the fact that for a developer or for a platform team, they don't care where it's running, right? It could be running in Amazon, it could be running on-prem, but the experience they get should be the same. The APIs they use, they should be the same. For them, it's really just building infrastructure as code, and whether it's running in a data center within my, private environment, whether it's running at the edge, or whether it's running, within a cloud environment, from their standpoint, that experience should be exactly the same.
Yeah, and you're not giving up your flexibility. And so in other words, you're not making a decision to go private cloud or public cloud. You can use both. It's called a hybrid cloud. It's been around for a long time. And ultimately, that seems to be the mix that people are leveraging. And so in other words, typically a multi-cloud environment, leveraging all three cloud providers, but the ability to leverage your core assets and resources on where it's going to deliver the most value. And that's going to be on a private cloud, 99 times out of 100 in the, several hundred architectures I've done in the last 10 years. So ultimately, it should be an architectural option. I'm not saying we're pushing it as the only solution, and you're going to use private cloud for certain types of public cloud for certain types of workloads. But if you're looking for an infrastructure that's going to be able to provide the most value, certainly when in the world we're moving into AI, that's going to be something that needs a very close look right now. Based on what you thought it was, look at what it actually is.
Yeah. No, spot on. And I think what this does now is it brings forward a lot of the data points that we received within this private cloud outlook study. And what's interesting from this, if you take a look at some of the data and what it's saying, is it's basically saying that first off, that cost reckoning, right, that what we were just talking about, the ability to be able to get better control of the cost as part of that. And what it showed is that 62% of the people surveyed, right, 1,800 enterprise decision makers were surveyed as part of this across the globe. So 600 North America, 600 in EMEA, 600 in APJ. And what that showed is that 62% of these IT leaders are extremely concerned about Gen AI and agentic AI cost for a lot of the reasons I think, Dave, you just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, AI, as I'm sizing these projects up, is going to be 10 to 20 times more expensive than the traditional approaches with the same sort of business problems you're looking to solve. Now, keep that in mind. So if we're going to run these things long term, typically that's going to be a focus on inference. We're doing the training systems and figuring out ways in we can economically do that. But the ability to, in essence, drive inference on platforms that aren't going to break the bank really needs to be the core, basically the core focus. We're becoming too dependent on the remote LLMs kinds of things to build agentic systems and things like that. And the reason why, again, it has the tendency to be the easy button for AI. It's already existing, it's already trained, already ready to go. You just push our information in there. But the tokens you're going to leverage there to solve the issue is going to be absolutely huge. It's going to be bank breaking. If you look at what happened just at Uber, they ran out of their budget in the first month because they ran out of tokens because they spent too much money because they didn't understand the cost of this stuff. You're able to replicate the same environment on commoditized equipment that you own and host, and it's going to be a fraction of the cost. And you're not going to pay the token, the cost of the tokens as it scales up and scales back. That's going to provide you with the ultimate flexibility, and also you're going to own the model. It's going to sit in your infrastructure. You're going to control it, governance systems, things like that. So if you're worried about all that, you worry about the cost, you worry about governance, you worry about security, that needs to be a platform you take a look at right now.
Yeah.
Well, and that's, yeah. Oh, go ahead, Pete.
I was going to say, yeah, Uber was definitely one of the first ones I heard. I thought was pretty funny. Even Microsoft had to move off of Claude for some of their engineering teams over to their own Copilot.
Right.
Yeah. And yeah, Dave, yeah, honestly, I get most of my AI entertainment from your YouTube channel. Dave Linthicum is not AI, and yeah, lots of really fun stories on there. But it's a reckoning. People, it's super exciting. I don't think I know a single person in IT who's not been like, oh my goodness, this is great. But then start to realize that these tokens, they're not cheap, and there's definitely you can run out of budget pretty quickly.
Well, and I think the key word is control, right? You want control over cost, control over security, and the ability to be able to govern these environments. And that's kind of that second point that comes out of this study is the fact that the top AI requirements: data protection, privacy, security, and control. So these are really core elements that for all these organizations, it's non-negotiable. This is not something that, you could cut corners and whatnot. You have to be able to do this, especially now, that these frontier AI models that are, essentially being used to be able to discover vulnerabilities and chain these vulnerabilities together. This is really a serious threat. And, we've been very much on the forefront of trying to drive solutions to be able to make sure, first off, that we've got a robust system. Second off, you've got the ability to be able to quickly patch these systems without having to take these systems down. And so I think organizations are going to have to be much more vigilant about protecting their systems, protecting the data against these coming threats.
Yeah. Also, you got to consider what purposes are we building these AI systems that are going to supporting our enterprise? We're building it in a ways that are going to support our business, and therefore the models need to be built using our own data. So it's not uploading, as much data as you can to an LLM and trying to, have a core window of customization on those systems, but your ability to create a custom model that's built specifically for your enterprise to address the needs of your enterprise. And that's going to be something you're going to have to own. It's not going to exist up and it's going to be an augmented LLM. If you're able to do that, your architecture, your AI, your use of AI is going to have 3 to 4 times the return of ROI versus you leveraging some sort of remote system. Not even consider the token waste going on. We're just talking about, apples and oranges kind of a comparison. So as I tell my architect students, we're going to get the benefit with the tactical use of AI systems. We're building a custom model that's focused directly on what we need it to do, and that's going to be built on our own equipment. Now, we can certainly put it up on managed service provider and other things like that. But at the end of the day, it needs to be a private infrastructure you have direct control over, and you're training it, guess what, with your own data. That's where the value is.
Yeah, not every organization has the ability to just go straight to a public cloud anyway, right? Like there's HIPAA requirements for health, there's data sovereignty concerns, and so yeah, there's many reasons why some of these organizations are like, yeah, AI sounds amazing. This is really going to help our business. I mean, heck, I was reading a report just the other day. I think it was PwC, and it was a really interesting article about the benefits of AI in the workforce. And there's a lot of fear about, oh, it's replacing all of these jobs, but the reality is that it's actually making per employee, the revenue increase is like up 27%, their value that they're generating for the company. And so I think a lot of organizations are seeing the value that AI can bring to their organization, but man, it has to be secure. It needs to be, I have to, comply with these, regulatory requirements. And so, yeah, there's a lot of concerns. While there's so much excitement about what it can actually bring to their organization, it needs to be done in a secure way.
Right, right. And so I think that leads us to the last point that came out from this survey is the fact that there's a talent gap, right? That the IT skills gap for AI infrastructure is massive, and they don't have the operational skills to be able to do so. And that's really where I think, you think about the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of VMware certified, cloud admins that have been working in vSphere, working in, around vCenter, and now, kind of deploying the full stack. There's a lot of capabilities there that now allows us the ability to be able to now take those and extend those into these modern technologies. Kubernetes was the first, wave of talent that we really try to help fill to be able to bring these back. But now AI is the next one, and the ability to be able to embed private AI as a stack within the VMware Cloud Foundation solution, I think brings forward a lot of capability from a talent standpoint where you can leverage the talent you have and extend that talent into some of these new use cases.
Rick, that's such a good point. I mean, enterprise after enterprise, they're failing, and they're not failing because the technology is necessarily failing, but they don't have the talent. They can't upgrade as fast. They can't train everybody. And so they're using these very advanced, sophisticated, very expensive systems, and they're failing. According to MIT, 95% of the AI projects out there do not return ROI. That's why. And so look at what you got in the way in which your infrastructure is currently built. In other words, you're able to build on top of it using the existing talent pool where you're able to do talent augmentation versus by replacing or, having to gut your existing staff. You're going to have a much more, a greater chance of success. And people need to understand that. That's way more important than people think. That's why people are failing out there. It's not because the technology is laying in eggs, because they don't have people around who are able to do it, because they're moving too fast. They can't update the talent in time, and strategically they're broken.
Yep, absolutely. And so I wanted to double click on the cost reckoning because I think there's a lot of data points that we pulled out of this study that really kind of demand a closer look. So if you compare against last year, right, when we surveyed the same group of enterprise decision makers as part of this, so last year they said from a cost management standpoint, 26% were saying that they've got a big challenge in the public cloud. 29% saw a security risk. 24% said compliance. And if you look at 2026, right, cost management has increased, right? So that concern is going up. Security risk stayed the same, and it's still pretty high. And compliance increased as well. And what's really interesting is when you double click on some of this data, you look to see that 97% believe that their public cloud spend is wasted. A lot of them don't know where they're spending money. There's a lack of control that comes a part of that, and 52% say that their waste exceeds 25%. Now think about that for a second. 25% of the cloud spend that's out there, that's a huge part of the budget. If you just imagine if you can claw back 25% of your budget as part of it. So I think this is really just pointing to some of the challenges that exist within these cloud environments.
Yeah, out there, the public cloud is being, the money that goes into those systems is just being wasted right and left. So people are provisioning stuff they're never going to use. They're not deprovisioning, not cleaning up the environment, zombie processes, all these sorts of things that they have. And of course, we introduced FinOps 5 years ago. And now here we are in 2026, we have the same issues. We're still spending and wasting the same amount of money. And the reason is because it's built in the infrastructure. So in other words, it's designed to work as a utility, and they don't necessarily want you to think about consumption. They want to think about selling you the services to leverage. And so that's going to get you locked into a system, which is going to force you to pay an absorbent price for these same sort of things versus the analogs that exist on premise. Cloud, as I found out at my insider book, 2 to 3 times more expensive than the on-prem version. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 10, but it's always more expensive. And not only because it's not as efficient as your on-prem resources, but in many instances, people don't know how to manage them correctly. And so they're going to overspend. 27%, I think is pretty good. Mostly I've seen 50%, 80%, just huge disasters in terms of people who are overspending in the cloud. And it's because of the way that the platform is configured and created and run. It's and also some discipline areas internal to the enterprise, but it's costing too much money.
Yeah. And Hey, Bob, thanks for joining the chat there. And anyone else that's listening, by all means, join the conversation. We'd love to chat with you about it. But Bob brings up a great point. He says that, our points are valid, but they sound like the same issues that have, operationally plagued IT, systems prior to AI's arrival. One thing I would add to that is that there's a common theme, right? Sometimes there's a lot of hidden charges. Dave, even on your MythBusters post that we talked about earlier about private cloud, you talked about some of those things like egress fees that sort of were more relevant to public cloud. But AI has another layer. A lot of organizations started working in public cloud with AI to run their inferencing for just for their piloting and their testing. But when they move that to production, there's a dependability on having those inference models running constantly. There's a need for the GPUs to be on demand and available. And sometimes when you're in a public cloud, that can be difficult depending on how they monitor or throttle their GPU usage. But then on top of that, it's not just the renting or the tokens, if you will, for the GPU, but it's the data movement. It's a mathematical equation to really quantify exactly how much some of this stuff costs, because you're renting the resource, you're renting the tokens, but then it's also constantly moving. So there's a lot of churn with AI, more than it was in your pilot environment. And then on top of that, you're having to pay for all that data movement when these GPUs are running so busy. So.
Yeah, Bob's absolutely right. I mean, we have the same sort of issues, the discipline issues, efficiency issues that we had for many, many years, and we're seeing in the cloud. The problem with the cloud is it's going to be outed as additional spending, where if we, over provision, some of the on-premise stuff, and we have too much headroom in some instances, that's going to be a bit more of an expense, but we're not paying for systems that we're provisioning and never use. And that's what happens in the public cloud provider. So in other words, we're seeing the efficiency in the public cloud, which is going to be amplified through wasted costs. We're not going to see that as much with owned equipment. And I think that's the difference right now. And so, we need to obviously work on the disciplines, but obviously I need to focus on the tactical reason that I'm spending this money, putting it in the place that's going to bring the most value back to the business. And if the inefficiencies are going to be in the public cloud, that's going to be way overspending on the amount of resources and leveraging the ability to get value back.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, one of the things that we hear and we see often is not so much just that operational spend, but today it becomes a CapEx problem. And even just getting, DRAM for servers that I want to be able to deploy within that becomes challenging in itself. And especially with some of these, very RAM hungry, memory hungry applications that are running out across there. And you look at some of these AI inference workloads, it drives a lot of demand for memory and RAM as part of it. And just the overall demand and the inability for the industry to be able to meet that demand, it creates some challenges. And I think there's some opportunities here as well to be able to leverage some of the technologies that we have around memory tiering to be able to leverage, NVMe as a tier of storage that I can use to be able to work around some of these memory challenges that exist within the infrastructure.
Yeah, try buying DRAM out there now and GPUs, and it seems to be getting sucked up by the different LLM providers and public cloud providers out there, kind of messing up the market. So it's a challenge out there to figure out where to configure and where to run this stuff. It's hugely different from one platform to the other. That's the biggest thing you need to take away from this. It's not just in millimeters, it's in feet, in terms of the difference in the price you're going to pay, the efficiency you're going to pay for each type of platform, private and public.
And so what this leads us to, and I think, we've been pointing to and really kind of highlighting some of the challenges that exist in public cloud infrastructure and where some of these challenges might be addressed. But what we're seeing is a continued trend towards repatriation. Last year when we did the same survey, 69% said that they were planning or considering repatriation of workloads from public cloud back on-prem. And of those, 35% had already done that. This year, it's grown from 69 to 83 that are considering, and 35 to 50 that have already started to move some workloads around. But what we did is we double clicked, right? We wanted to go and take a look at what are the workloads that are coming back on-prem. And it's no surprise when you look at some of the workload types here, right? High security, very compliant, EHR, health records, payment systems. Those are the ones that are coming back on-prem. Data intensive applications, business critical, but then right there in the middle, right? Where it wasn't even recorded last year is AI. So as people are building AI infrastructure, they're starting to move these, if they're not built day one or day zero in on-prem, they're now starting to move those from the cloud providers into their on-prem environment. So I think just interesting data when you look at it, but it just shows you some of the trends and what's happening really just over the past 12 months.
Yeah, this is a huge undiscussed thing out there in the IT tech press right now. And in other words, the amount of repatriation I'm seeing going on in the space is exponentially rising. Everybody is talking about correcting. We just hit the reason for it. In other words, we're spending 2 to 3 times the amount of money on applications that are running on the public cloud platforms, and they're putting them back on the on-prem systems basically to for cost efficiency. That's it. And so 10 years ago, they made mistakes in moving many different applications, lifting and shifting into the cloud. They're realizing that those things running on the public cloud environments hugely inefficient, and obviously the meter is going to be running on those, so they're burning way more money than they thought they would, and they're trying to correct those mistakes right now, and having to basically put them back to where they found them and put them on other modernized platforms. The other thing is the AI thing is kind of repatriation, is planned repatriation. So in many cases, they're leveraging AI to prototype or basically create the pilot projects, because the cloud providers are the easy button for AI, for the AI ecosystems, things like that. Yep. And once they're getting those done, they're putting them back on prem and running them and training them and basically doing the operation stuff that exists on our own equipment. The reason why is cost. It's way too expensive to run in the cloud. They can't afford it. That's what my clients are telling me. So they put it back on premise because that's the only option that they have. That's the only way they're going to be able to afford their AI workloads.
Yeah, and there's a lot more. There's a lot more ability when you own your gear, when you own your private cloud environment, to take advantage of bringing that spend down by doing things like we've been doing forever with virtualization, virtualizing compute, virtualizing storage, but also memory and even GPU. I mean, we talked about how those GPU resources are so expensive and how it's hard. They're sometimes it's even a commodity to get in public cloud. But when you have those, when you can manage those virtually and you can have high availability and actually, split those out to individual users and throttle all of that inside of your own environment, that kind of speaks to that wasted cost that we talked about earlier, Rick, where organizations are wasting public cloud spend. That's not something you really can afford to do with some of these super expensive resources. DDR5 is super expensive, but yeah, being able to actually take advantage of NVMe tiering, memory tiering, and couple that with your DDR5, your server costs are going, way down, because you can actually tier your memory, and then supplement some of that performance with the NVMe memory tiering. So lots of opportunities in a private cloud environment that you can't really get in a public cloud environment.
Yeah. And again, I think it just points to this trend of repatriation. But what I like about this year's report is that it really double clicks into not only, what are the macro reasons for it, but then what are the workloads that are doing that? And I think it's a good opportunity for organizations that are doing planning, right? 2027 planning, looking at where those workloads live and look at the opportunity to be able to bring it back on-prem to be able to address some of those, requirements. And I think this is a great segue into, what's kind of that new non-negotiable, right? In terms of security, sovereignty, and compliance. And certainly, if you look at some of the data that came out of the report itself, it said 4 out of 5 IT leaders that were surveyed said their geopolitics and regulatory factors are affecting IT strategy and operations, right? So it's no surprise that the tensions that have been created out across there are creating a lack of trust. Certainly for technology providers as part of this, and I think the AI system providers are not immune to this. I think there's a lot of lack of trust there, but also on the infrastructure side. If I build infrastructure that is sovereign, data sovereignty, and David, I think this points back to the article that you wrote last year around data sovereignty and some of the challenges that are faced around sovereignty, and that sovereignty, I like the term you use. You said sovereignty is an outcome. And you have to think about that, right? In terms of, I'm trying to achieve a specific outcome for it. And that's what sovereignty really does. But it provides, I think, a new lens in which to look at this and, look at security and compliance in that same light.
Yeah, this is going to be a bigger issue moving forward. I've noticed that all the conferences I'm going to, the sovereignty talks are the ones that are just standing room only because people are trying to figure out how to do that. It is an outcome and it has to be planned when we have to figure out how we're dealing with compliance and also our own local policies and how we're going to managing, many of these AI models that we're building, which are basically instances of data where the patterns are stored along with the information, which is the crown jewels in terms of your business. If you're building an AI model based on your own data, it's going to have a significant amount of power in terms of how you define and how you're going to run your business. And putting that in your own infrastructure is going to simplify compliance. It's going to simplify management. It's going to simplify all these policies and rules. If you put it you're trying to leverage a hybrid environment. We're pushing it between a public cloud provider and an on-prem private cloud environment, and we're figuring out how to deal with the compliancies there and all those sorts of things. You just end up wasting your time in also using an infrastructure that's going to be hugely more expensive. So sovereignty has to be a core plan. If we're building these AI systems, it has to be built into these environments. 50% of the AI systems that I work on are going to be sovereign AI systems. In other words, they're dictating to me where the thing's going to exist and how it's going to be run. And in many cases, private clouds are going to be the only option because ultimately they can't use public clouds with the compliance issues, with the policy issues that they're dealing with. Right now, EU, huge push right now, trying to get into the sovereign environments. Using their own equipment. We're also seeing the start of it in the USA. And I think over the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to see a huge push in people running it on their own equipment and even remigrating their stuff back from the public cloud providers back to their own equipment just to deal with the sovereignty.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dave, I know you talk to a lot of customers about these things, and I was just curious because I know this has been data sovereignty has been an issue even before AI. So I'm just curious, how much do you think AI has contributed to this concern for data sovereignty?
It's been basically all the conversations I'm having now. I talked about data sovereignty over the last 20 years with cloud computing and things like that. It was always an issue, and some of the GDPR standards out of the EU and that kind of stuff. But right now, when people are considering AI, the AI sovereignty thing is much more important for it because they view themselves as having made sovereignty mistakes over the last 20 years and leveraging the public cloud providers. Now, if they have a blank slate in terms of where these AI models are going to reside and run, sovereignty is typically going to be on the critical path. And so everybody is talking about it, how to run it, best practices, how to make it happen, how to mix and match with some of the remote LLM providers, all that stuff is possible, but it just has to be planned. We have to put an architecture behind it, have to put a plan and strategy in terms of how it's going to be done. And everybody is dealing with that right now. And it's going on behind the scenes. It's not talked about a lot because I don't think it's the cool, sexy stuff we're seeing out in the tech press, right, but it's the majority of architectural problems that I work on these days.
Yeah. And a couple of the quotes that came out of this data from the survey I thought were pretty telling as well. In the fact that, a lot of these organizations and leaders go into this thinking that, oh, sovereignty is just a checkbox and whatnot. But they found out that it really reshaped their entire architecture, and they had to re-architect in order to make sure that they're, meeting the requirements of, both compliance and sovereignty as part of this. So it's more than just data residency. It's more than just a location. It's really more, how do I approach making sure that my data and my systems are sovereign in terms of the ability to be able to maintain control, right? And that's, I think, kind of a theme that we've been talking about over time is really this control factor.
Yeah, and one thing, that 800-pound gorilla in the room's happened for the last couple of years is the amount of public cloud outages that we had. And so many of the sovereignty things that I'm talking about, dealing with compliance and also dealing with policy regulations, the fact of the matter is they're going to want to run it on equipment they control. But in many cases, their systems were brought down for a day last year due to the cloud outages because they had some sort of a dependency in a public cloud provider, and they were dead in the water and lost many billions of dollars. There's no recourse in order to get it back. And so now they realize that vulnerability has to be dealt with, and sovereignty is driving a lot of things having to deal with security and compliance, but it's driving a lot of reliability issues as well. So people are migrating into their own platform because they view it as having direct control over its reliability versus having the dependency on a remote cloud system that may have a dependency on a remote cloud system, have a dependency on a remote cloud system, where one of those things in the chain goes down and they're dead in the water for a day like they were last year, but it could be for a week and it could be for more than that. And then you're out of business.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So it really just brings forward, I think, a lot of the reasons why people are adopting private cloud as part of this. And Dave, I think one of the more recent articles and posts that you've done is really kind of looking, because we spent a lot of time talking about cost reduction, a lot of time talking about production AI. But what we want to do now is really start to pull this together, right? In terms of as these decision makers are planning, their next architecture to be able to support the coming demand of workloads that are coming in here. I think they go in with a view to be able to say, look, I have a fixed budget. I need to be able to work within that budget to be able to do so. But now how can I essentially build infrastructure that is fungible, that gives me the elasticity that I need to be able to support these growing workloads, and that when these projects are completed, essentially tear down those infrastructure components and now put that back into a pool so that it can be reused. So, help walk us through some of the points that you raised in this article, and what are some of the considerations that folks need as they're planning these?
Yeah, at the end of the day, we're here to build infrastructure that's going to be most efficient. It doesn't matter what technology we use. That is the goal and objective. In order to return value back to the business, we have to remember that as architecture. We have lots of other things to consider, and the ability to look at how much money we're going to spend, the location of data, have the ability to deal with security, ops, those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, we need to construct an infrastructure that's going to have the scalability, it's going to have the elasticity, and it's going to have the efficiency that we think we're going to need and believe we're going to need. That gets into the architecture. So in looking at that, that's where the consideration of private cloud comes up to the model. In other words, the cost efficiency is there, and also the scalability is there. Well, wait a minute, Dave, how can it be scalable if it's going to be our own hardware and it's going to be a static amount of servers? Well, the scalability is built in the infrastructure that you're running on. So in other words, the private cloud software is going to be able to allow you to allocate the resources and the number of servers and the number of amount of memory, number of CPUs that you need to run your system. And it's able to do so in an efficient way where it's able to allocate it to the resources that are going to need it, and do so in a way which is going to emulate a multi-tenant environment, which is what public clouds are. So in other words, it's going to be indistinguishable for you that you're running on a public cloud because the behaviors are much the same. It's going to replicate the security. It's going to ultimately replicate the efficiency. It's going to replicate the operations and the operational capabilities, and it's going to replicate control and governance, which is even going to be better on the private cloud environment. So ultimately, it's looking at the ability to reshape your infrastructure into something that's going to be better than you're currently working with, even if you're dealing with a public cloud platform. The ability to replicate the best of what public cloud is able to do, but do so on an infrastructure that's going to have the cost efficiencies that we haven't seen yet. Let me tell you, that's where the game is going to be won. We don't have an unlimited amount of money in these enterprises. My clients don't. And so we can't spend an unlimited amount of money on these public cloud infrastructures. And so we have to look at the efficiency of this, the cost efficiency of this. And this is really the only architectural option that I see is going to be worthwhile, I think, in the next few years as we're scaling up for AI and as we're modernizing our existing platforms.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier, but this is the reason why the 2026 private cloud survey, the three key areas that people are looking at when we're talking about repatriation is the reasons: cost, complexity, and control, and cost being one of the biggest ones. I mean, people going from spending hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on inferencing and in the public cloud to now having to rethink how they're going to do things, moving to a la carte, throttling, ways internally. Like, it's just not sustainable. So being able to take advantage of private cloud to help save that money is a huge one. And as we already talked about, the compliance and the complexity, there's so many reasons why organizations, I think public cloud initially made sense for organizations to look into AI. But I think, as we talked about, there's a massive reckoning that's happening, and people are starting to realize this isn't exactly what we thought it was going to be.
Look at the metrics: 48% improvement in operational efficiency, 39% faster issue to resolution, 42% server cost reduction, 34% lower storage TCO with a private cloud environment. So that's amazingly more efficient than we're currently dealing with the public cloud options, or even some of the other options out there.
Absolutely. And as Bob said, I mean, Bob said this means true private cloud, not just on-prem infrastructure. And that's spot on, because it requires that operational discipline to be able to essentially have control over it, to be able to leverage the kind of abstraction of the underlying infrastructure so that you are able to deliver it as a service, right? It's that it goes back to what we talked about earlier. It's that same experience. The dev team and the platform engineers, they essentially just want to be able to go in and know infrastructure is there when they need it, run their sprints. When they finish their sprint, they essentially destroy the clusters. All that capacity goes back in there. So that really is that operational model that you need to be able to do so. But you also need to be able to have the visibility when, infrastructure starting to run low, right? When do I start to hit that cap? At that threshold where I need to either bring in additional infrastructure to be able to do so, or this, going back to what you said earlier, Dave, this gives the model of a hybrid cloud, right? Where now I can use cloud services as a way to be able to burst, to take advantage of those spikes that I may not be able to handle on-prem, but the ability to be able to leverage, infrastructure that's running with that same operational model. So the mindset, the model doesn't change from a cloud operating standpoint, whether I'm running on-prem or bursting into the cloud. I have that same experience. And to the user, that should be completely transparent. I shouldn't even know as a platform engineer that now I'm starting to burst out in a cloud inference, or I'm running solutions at the edge. It should be very straightforward.
You don't have
Yeah.
the private cloud abstraction layer. That's going to be the keys to the kingdom with this stuff. So this is not just throwing servers into a rack and kind of hoping for the best. You have to have a very sophisticated abstraction layer, private cloud infrastructure to run, to operate, to allocate this stuff, and even leverage your public cloud assets through that infrastructure. And so it becomes the jumping off point for how we're going to leverage this thing, a jumping off point for the efficiency of it.
Yep, absolutely. So, Simon, you can bring the slide back in. We're going to jump ahead to kind of our next topic and really look at evaluating some of these private AI platforms. And Dave, I know this is a post you did just a week or so ago in looking at the private AI cloud platforms. So help us understand a little bit more about those platforms and how, how you evaluated this and what are some of the kind of outcomes from this evaluation.
Yeah, what I did is just brought the five together. These are, one of the top five in the industries that are most recognized, you guys being one of them. But then look at the different metrics. And what I did is I put a survey out to enterprises that are looking to consume this in terms of how they're going to evaluate these platforms, what's important to them and what's not important to them. And I came up with private cloud, platform maturity, infrastructure breadth and completeness, operational scalability, security and control, governance, compliance, architectural feasibility, cost predictability. That was a key thing. And then time to deploy. And those are the most important things that are out there. So how easy it is to use this thing, how efficient is it to run from an operational standpoint? Are we able to secure it? Are we able to govern it? Are we able to deal with the flexibility of it? Is able to adapt to different environments? And are we able to figure out what we're going to be spending on? And the big reason people are leveraging private cloud is the cost predictability. They're sick of these $100,000 cloud bills that are coming in by surprise, and the ability to buy the hardware and software and put the abstraction around it. And what we found was within those core platforms, and we looked at the five, obviously, the platform, well, just looking at platform maturity and things like that, you guys are at 9.8, and everybody else had a lower score, but ultimately your ability to rate high in the majority of these particular platforms in a mathematical direction where that ends up being the platform you pick, because this is going to be, you pick one, you can't pick all three, you can't pick all five, is what people need to consider. So in other words, look at these metrics and you got to basically figure out what your metrics are for yourself. Yours is going to be a bit different. These are general metrics that we're applying to the evaluation of this technology. But this is what the enterprises think are most important to them. This is not what I think is most important to them or what Broadcom thinks is most important to them. These are the people who actually buy and deploy this stuff. So you kind of have to take this to heart. So evaluate your technology using the lens. You may want to break these apart. You may want to add some additional capabilities that you're looking for, different features and functions. But ultimately, this is the way they should be broken apart. This is the way it should be evaluated. And at the end of the day, you got to pick a winner. And that's what we did in this article.
Yeah, no, this is, like I said, it's a great data point. I think what it does is it really kind of points to how new a lot of this is in the market, right? Because it's changing so rapidly. And every time we meet with customers, we learn about new use cases and new opportunities. So I think we've really just started to scratch the surface in terms of this. But the second point I wanted to raise was the fact that, of these solutions, many of these are, either bolt-ons or they're additional modules that I need to be able to bring into it. And one of the things that we did last year within the VCF stack was we actually integrated private AI as part of it. And I'll admit that was somewhat controversial at first, just because of the fact that it did bring forward some additional cost as part of the solution itself. But now what it says is that every system that we ship has the AI capabilities embedded within it, so that now we've got the ability to be able to enable any of our customers the ability to be able to deploy these AI systems as part of the core stack rather than having to bolt something onto it. So in your studies with your with your clients, what are you seeing in terms of the ability and willingness for customers to be able to deploy AI today?
I think it needs to be systemic to everything. That's what I'm hearing a majority of the time. So in other words, as people are looking at the technology, AI is going to be a component. Either you're going to have augmented applications or going to have augmented infrastructure. And so it has to be able to run that infrastructure directly, a relationship and adjacent to the data and adjacent to the applications. So it becomes something that you guys, when you added AI to your private cloud platform, that was a step in the right direction because that's what people are looking for. Now, looking at these platforms here, these are private AI cloud platforms. So these are private clouds that really kind of run AI in different ways. And one of the things that you guys did a bit different is really have a systemic view. So in other words, it's going to be a part of the platform. It's not going to be a decoupled component. It's not just a piece of software that you added to it. And so that seems to be on the critical path with these folks out there who are picking this stuff. So in other words, if they're going to leverage a private cloud, typically, 99 times out of 100, they're going to run AI on that private cloud as well. They want it to be AI enabled. And you have to have the capability of using it in a way that's going to be efficient, where it's systemically built into the operating environment. It's not an afterthought. And we saw the afterthoughts, and there's many afterthoughts still out there. But what you guys did well, and what a few of the other players did well, is think in terms of how it's going to be embedded in the platform.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like looking at this list and just seeing all the different pieces. It's nice to see us, high up there in the private cloud platform maturity. Of course, I mean, VMware's been around for a while, but VCF really changed the game, bringing everything together. And even in that private outlook study, like one of the bigger concerns, cost being one of them, having the ability to have that cost predictability, but just the complexity, right? Having an architecture that can actually be deployed, with simplicity, but also to be managed. And so, yeah, VCF 9 has really made some massive, changes in that area. It's nice to see that, we've been getting these high marks in a couple of other reports as well. And it's really just a reflection of all the engineering resources that have just been absolutely poured into VCF 9 and now 9.1.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what this also does is, again, going back to the private cloud survey that were out there, brings forward a couple other data points I think really ties all of this nicely together in a nice little bow, right? So if you look at, how AI changes kind of the complexity of private cloud and how private cloud addresses some of these requirements, you look right at the top, and Dave, to what you just talked about, right? Security and compliance, no surprise, is right at the top of the stack in terms of importance as part of this. Data sovereignty control, performance, right? So let's not forget that these, AI systems have a need for very low latency, very high throughput to be able to support this. So you need the networking infrastructure, you need the storage infrastructure, you need the compute infrastructure to be able to support this. It's not just GPUs, but all of the underlying infrastructure needs to be able to support this performance and latency requirements. Integration with existing systems is important. Cost predictability and financial control, something we've kind of talked a lot at, and as well the speed of development, right? So that whole thought of agility now comes back into the question in terms of building these AI systems to be able to support these next set of workloads that are coming on.
Yeah, this is a good list, and it is what I'm seeing out there. Security compliance is everything for these folks, but it has to be done in a certain way where it's systemic to the environment, and where you can actually access it as a common control plane that's across the different applications and different platforms that you're leveraging on the private cloud environment, and do so in a way that's going to have scalability. It's going to be everything moving forward. Everybody's going to have vulnerabilities that really are not even understood right now as people are weaponizing AI, the bad actors, to come after this stuff. And if it's network connected, you're going to be vulnerable. But looking at everything and anything, you have to remember that these systems, you just kind of hit the nail on the head. This is not about throwing GPUs at everything. This is about, fast and efficient memory subsystems, fast and efficient IO subsystems, fast and efficient networking subsystems. It all comes together. Your application, certainly your AI application, is going to run as fast as the slowest components that I just mentioned. And so everything has to work in conjunction of each other. This is not about having the fastest processor. If you think getting the Blackwell processor in there and it's going to, solve all your issues, you got another thing coming. You got to have something that's holistic, systemic, and where the abstraction layer is able to leverage the hardware components in ways that are going to be most efficient.
Yep, absolutely. And so Daniel actually in the questions that asked about the public cloud, right? In terms of how we provide that, and Daniel, to your point, kind of two thoughts come to mind here. First one is all of the hyperscalers were essentially, when 9.0 was released last year, VCF 9.0 was released last year. Most of them put it in the labs, they evaluated in the labs, but they didn't put it into production. They were really waiting for 9.1 to be able to put that into production. So it's certainly our expectation that the major hyperscalers, right, the Elastic VMware service from AWS, which is now about a year old, Azure VMware service, right, the Google Cloud VMware engine, we expect that they will move to VCF 9.1 using that architecture on their clouds. But for sovereignty requirements, there are about 80 sovereign cloud providers that we have within our cloud service provider program that operate, throughout Europe, throughout APJ, and even in North America. And if you're really concerned about sovereignty and ensuring those sovereign requirements, there is a multi-point checklist that they have to be able to meet those requirements. If indeed you don't have one in your area or you're having difficulty finding access, reach out, Daniel. We'd be happy to help you, kind of point you in the right direction to be able to connect you with one of those cloud service providers that does provide that capability. So again, good data points. Appreciate the questions. We got about 8 minutes left, so I just want to be able to wrap up here.
And real quick, one other point about that adoption is that I thought was interesting is we recently had an on-site meeting in Palo Alto, and there was a bunch of customers that came on, and they were looking at getting first looks at VCF 9.1, and they were talking about their upgrading to VCF 9. And I got to talk to a lot of different customers, European as well as in the US. And one of the recurring themes I kept hearing, which I found interesting, was a lot of them were moving, they were accelerating their movement to VCF 9 based on the fact that private AI was part of the core offering, because AI is so important now for them, and being able to do that in a private cloud environment was the key driver for their adoption. They were like, we got to get this done now because we want to start taking advantage of using private AI in their environment. And the fact that it's just part of VCF 9, which is something that they have as an entitlement, it became the biggest driver. So yeah, AI is definitely a big driver for VCF 9.
That's how people are going to be picking private clouds from now for the next 5 years.
Exactly. And so I think this, I know we discussed this earlier, but I think this puts a finer point on, the talent gap, right? And what challenge this presents. And, Dave, I thought you made a very good point earlier around the fact that a lot of times they overlook this, right? And it becomes what's the difference between success and no success is the ability to be able to have staff that you can take, that essentially not only can manage the infrastructure, but also manage the AI systems.
It's everything. And it's something that people, I think, don't understand as much. In other words, it's the reason for most of the failures are going on out there. And all it takes is some strategic planning and really considering what your as-is state is, who you have there, what talent you have there, what you're valuing in terms of your architectural framework, where you're leveraging it, where you're looking to take it, and not only just looking at throwing new technology at it and doing vast, head-breaking turns, into the new realm of AI, but the ability to understand how your people are going to morph in that environment. And if you don't consider that, you're going to fail. I don't care if you pick the best technology in the world. at the end of the day, that needs to be core part in terms of how you're going to build and deploy this stuff. Because if you're trying to move fast, you got to get your talent moving fast, and they're not going to move that fast. And you have to consider how fast you're going to make them move, and you have to put a technology infrastructure, what's realistic around how you're going to do that. And also, don't overlook your existing assets. I think that happens a great ton. We have a tendency to have looking at the new stuff, shiny object kind of thing, and trying to figure out where your existing assets and partners are going to take that systems, including AI, to the next level, and then figuring out how your talent meshes into that is very important. It'll save you money, save you time, save your business.
Yeah, absolutely. To that point, and it's, going back to what we had talked about earlier, the ability to leverage that, the VMware tattooed, I like to call them, admins that are out there, because what it does is it brings forward a lot of that tribal knowledge that they bring forward in terms of being able to run vSphere and vCenter and VCF as part of these systems, but now extending that into these modern applications, it's a win-win, right? Because now you're expanding the skill set of these, very scarce resources as part of that, and your the ability to be able to bring these talents into the next generation of what you're bringing forward in your infrastructure, I think starts to bring this forward from the standpoint of leveraging the resources you have today and then growing those resources so that now they have the ability to be able to manage these complex systems.
Absolutely. And being able to run, being able to simplify your private cloud environment to being able to support, deploy, manage VMs, containers, which a lot of the AI is running on, and having your entire AI environment all in one environment is, that's kind of the goal of VCF, is to simplify the stack itself and the management of that, so that to actually help with that skills gap.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, so I see your question in there. So Daniel's question is around, within Europe, they want to be able to essentially manage, within their European territory. So which really is, one of the aspects of sovereignty that we were talking about. And so, Daniel, what I did is I actually there's two links that I'm throwing in chat for you now. The first one was the one to the general CSP page. The second one is to a list of sovereign cloud providers. There's about 80 of them that we have in there. So depending on where you're at, what services you need, you should be able to essentially research these and be able to find it. If indeed you can't get to that, reach out. I'm happy to be able to answer any questions that you have in real time, but feel free to reach out and I'd be able to address those. So we're running up to the top of the hour here. Dave, Pete, great session as always. I want to close with just a few recommendations just to be able to put a nice tight bow on this in terms of what are some of the considerations, what are some of the things that, that the survey data tells us, but that you can think about in terms of actions over the next 30, 60, 90 days as part of it. First off, lead with AI in your private cloud, right? I think a lot of the data that we shared and a lot of the points that are brought forward really kind of come to that conclusion. Whether you're the CIO, the CFO, or your infrastructure lead, I think there's some actions that you can take as part of that. Also, the opportunity to be able to reclaim the cloud economics. Dave, I think you said it well before, is the ability to be able to essentially take advantage of the fact that now I have control over the cost, control over the security on this. Now, what can I do with it, right? How can I essentially use my infrastructure, my private cloud infrastructure, as a competitive differentiator, as you do that? And then, the last point here, and I think this is a kind of a good one, a little tongue in cheek, but it's govern AI before it governs you, right? So look at all that cross-border data. You want to be able to review the workload strategy and be able to make sure that your AI agent governance plan is in place as you do that. Dave, any thoughts on this?
No, I think it's as good. It's a good way to leave it. And I think I love the govern AI before it governs you, because I'm seeing a lot of people governed by AI. And you have to, in essence, look at how this stuff is going to bring business economics to you. That's everything here. In other words, it's not the most popular technology in the shiny object. It's the one that's going to bring the most value back to the business. I know that sounds overly pragmatic, but we need to focus back on that.
Absolutely. Pete, any final thoughts?
My final thoughts are, if you're in this area, if you're watching this, if you've gotten this far, it's because you have a passion for this stuff. And so if you do, I would highly recommend you head over to Dave Linthicum's YouTube pages. He's got two of them. You can just Google his name. You'll find them. There's so much great conversation going on over there. Dave, I learned a lot of stuff from you in your books and your YouTube channel. So I just wanted to take a minute to thank you.
Yeah, it's fun telling the truth. Thanks for the plug.
Absolutely. Well, Dave and Pete, thanks again for doing this. Thank you everybody for joining, and for those that were interacting with this, feel free to keep the conversation going. So reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any questions, and if there's any follow-ups that are needed as part of this, we'd be happy to take that. Again, take the survey that'll be sent to you right afterwards. Definitely appreciate that. At this point, we'll conclude and wish you a good day.